Welcome to Flourish-Meant, the podcast on living life as you are meant to, so you can flourish. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to have my friend and fellow writer, Edwina Perkins, here with us today. She is on the Word Weavers International Advisory Committee, and she is managing editor of Harambee Press, an imprint which seeks to publish ethnic writers and story with Ironstream Media. She's also a Guideposts magazine contributing writer. I'm excited to have her talk to us about unity in diversity. Welcome, Edwina.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I am so fascinated by this topic, unity and diversity, and I'm so excited that you're here to talk to us today about this. What is it in your background, in your professional and personal experience that helps you to feel passionate about this topic? And why do you feel like it's important right now today for listeners to know how to incorporate this truth more into their everyday lives?
It's interesting that you asked me that question because I feel like I've been preparing to answer it for my entire life. I grew up in North Carolina and was very aware of diversity or the differences, not only in races, but within the race. My features are not what you would consider typical African American, and for that very reason, I was often teased by how I looked, by how I spoke. And what I really longed for was to have that unity within the race and with other races. When I went to college, I even became more aware of it because at one point I thought about pledging a sorority. And I'll never forget, I walked up to the table and the two young girls sitting there looked at me and looked at each other and said, "Wouldn't you rather pledge to the Black sororities?" And I didn't know there was a difference at that point. I had a friend who was a part one. I asked if they represented this one, and they said yes. I said, well, this is where I want to pledge. And I almost went through with it until I walked into an auditorium that probably had 1,000 or so young ladies, and I only saw one other person in there who was of my complexion. And again, it was the reminder that I felt like I was different. And then I went on to be a part of a well-known Christian organization. And for the 30 years that I was a part of it, there were less than 100 African Americans involved the entire time. And I still ask the question, what's going on? So when I started writing, I began to understand the importance of writing stories of people like me. Everyone is very familiar with The Cosby Show. And the reality is, for a lot of people, that was just fantasy. It wasn't possible. But for a lot of people of color, it was a reality of something we could reach for. So as I got involved with Harambee Press, I saw the importance of we need to publish more ethnic writers. We need to get more ethnic stories out there, not just Black, but all ethnic stories and writers. And that's the path I feel like God has put me on.
Do you find that this is just as much an issue as it has been in the past, or that it's becoming more of an issue now?
In my personal opinion, I think it's an issue that's always hovered. It's just coming out with different terminology. I grew up, it was racism. What I hear more now is the need for diversity and it's terminology. I don't think it's ever gone away. I think we're more aware of it than ever before because as the U.S. becomes more and more ethnically diversified, the awareness is there. And whereas in the past people may have been silent, now they're speaking up.
Do you find that people, no matter what their ethnicity, are inclined to circle their wagons and stay in their comfort zones and remain only with those who seem just like them. What is the danger in doing that?
Yes, I do see that. And the danger is no growth. When we talk about the idea of unity and diversity, we almost need to start with defining terms. Unity means just to join as a whole, but diversity is variety. So when you look at that at first glance, you're thinking, okay, these are opposite meanings. But unity and diversity really means oneness in variety. It means that we focus on the existence of unity even after lots of differences of culture or social or physical differences. And so when we circle the wagon, there's no room for growth, and there's lots of room for misconceptions.
How have you seen fear fester when people circle the wagons and only identify with certain people that look just like them, that feel the same way they do, that adopt their beliefs, that have their same ethnicities, their same cultural backgrounds, and their same socioeconomic status?
Fear is a normal emotion to go to when you don't understand. Fear is something that we process from our own circling of the wagon, as you put it. When we are afraid to step out, when we are afraid to consider or even embrace different cultures or different individuals, whether it be skin color, whether it be, it could be a handicap, then fear will keep us in the smallness of our world. I have a young lady who was a student I used to teach, who ended up literally the day of her wedding, she found herself in a wheelchair. And it was all due to a mole situation, but it took months for them to diagnose her. And as I sat and I had lunch with her one day, she said the one thing she learned about people who are different, I think is exactly the word she used, is that when others are uncomfortable with you, they won't make eye contact. Mm-hmm. And this is a very outgoing, beautiful, blonde little girl. And I could not imagine people looking away from her just because she was in a chair. Well, we do that with things that we're not comfortable with when we are in environments where there's people who are different. Fear keeps us from bridging that gap to be unified in our diversity. And that's the important thing to remember. We're not a melting pot. We say it, it used to be the term years ago, oh, we're the melting pot. But the idea is a melting pot, you put everything in it and everything blends together. We are not, the whole purpose of the unity in diversity is not to blend together, but is to recognize that even in our differences, we can still come together.
It's more like a salad than a fondue, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Where we don't cook it until it all melts together, but we maintain the integrity of the pieces, but the nourishment comes from the balance of the diversity of the pieces that are included together, and only together can we fully be strong.
I couldn't have worded that better. I think one of the misconceptions, because I'm going to say as a nation, so often reach for that melting pot, that one of the things that have been said to me numerous times, and I'm to the point, I don't get offended, but I want to educate. When someone says, well, when I look at you, Edwina, I don't see color. And I usually reply to that, I wish you would. Mm-hmm. Because when you don't see color, you negate part of who I am. I'm an African American woman. I did not grow up as a white, any class woman. And because of my skin color, I have faced trials, I have faced difficulties, I have faced racism. And I want you to see me for who I am, not see the color just to make me different or stand out, but to see my skin color and still embrace the fact that we can come together in spite of all the differences that we face. So I want you to see me as an African American woman.
What are some ways that we can benefit from including ourselves and including others in this nourishing salad of our human experience by having diversity and yet respecting our differences as strengths that are adding to our lives?
I like the fact that you said respecting our differences. One of the things I usually point out that I ask of people is, I don't want you to apologize to me because you're white. God made you just the way he did, the same as he made me. So you need to be able to embrace who you are first before you can begin to understand who I am. The other thing that I always say is ask questions. And I know people, we've heard the quote before, there's no such thing as a stupid question. I think the only stupid question is the one that's not asked. So ask with a purpose of understanding, and understand that sometimes your questions, the way they're worded, can be a little hurtful. But if you are in safe company, the individual will point out to you, okay, maybe you could have worded it this way, but I'm going to answer your question. So I think on both sides, or all sides, we need to be willing to ask questions to learn and to be willing to step out of comfort zones.
Comfort zones can be our own worst prison, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. I have a coffee cup that sometimes I want to smash on the floor, and sometimes I drink coffee out of it and just go, It says, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And there are days when I go, oh, you're so right, it does. And there are other days I want to just smash it to the floor and go, but I like my comfort zone. I don't want to get outside of my comfort zone. But if I take that for what it really says, life begins outside of my comfort zone, then I need to understand there's a whole world out there that if I'm just willing to step out, if we are just willing to step out, who knows what we'll discover. And even when I took on the role with Harambe Press, I was stepping out of my comfort zone. I always considered myself, and I still do, just a writer who edits every now and then. And when I was asked to take on this role of managing editor, after saying yes, I still remember, saying to God, what am I doing? How do I do this? And I cannot begin to tell you the mistakes I've made in the learning process. But I've also met some amazing writers and other people in the industry that, had I said no to this opportunity, I would have never met. So we do need to step out, even if it's a little bit. Stepping out of your comfort zone, and I know this may sound cliche-ish, could be take time and work at a soup kitchen, or take time and work with the Boys and Girls Club. Step out of your comfortable zone, because you will grow. And until we all begin to do that, until we're willing as people, as a nation, to do that, then there's a lot of doors that are going to continue to slam in people's faces. There's a lot of fences that will be broken down. And if we can learn to unify, we will be a stronger nation.
What is the driving factor besides our growth that can reach out? Because there were so many people that had different motivations that championed the rights and the responsibilities that we have to include those who are homeless or those who are of socioeconomic need, or those who are facing physical challenges or who are neurodiverse. There are lots of things that people have done out of a motivation of bitterness, whereas other people, like Dr. Martin Luther King had a motivation of love, of embracing people, of bringing people together in a fellowship of hearts. What is the difference in the outcome based on the difference in motivation in these diversity seeking paths that we can choose?
It's interesting that you should ask, because sometimes the outcome is the same, even if the heart is not where it needs to be. I would just encourage people, don't do it out of sheer obligation. But if that's where you need to start, just to make sure you're doing something, then start there. It's kind of like when we want to form a good habit, and we have to, no one gets up one day and says, I'm going to run 10 miles. They haven't even ran the first one. They have to build up to it. And sometimes stepping out of our comfort zone, we take a baby step first, and it might feel extremely uncomfortable. There's times you have to do and trust that the heart will follow. But if you're reaching out to help people, the outcome may be the same. One of the things that I want to just take a minute to address is, because we're writers, is the importance of diversity in children's literature. By this year, I don't know if it's by the beginning of the 2020 school year in the fall, but there will be more multicultural children in classrooms than not. And I have 2 grandchildren right now who are multicultural, multiracial, and I want them to be able to open a book and see someone like them. That wasn't something that I was privileged to experience growing up. And for these kids to see individuals who look like them, who share their life experiences, it does a couple of things. It lets them know they're not alone. It lets them know that they are going through experiences that are shared by others like them. And for each one child that lifts, it gives another 100 children empathy for that race. And so if we don't start producing more ethnic diversity children's books, then we're going to continue kind of in that circling the wagon, kind of holding to our own in a nation that is growing past that. And so I am constantly encouraging, like my daughter-in-law, I love her dearly. And one of the things that she said that blessed me beyond words was, she said, Mom, I'm not Black, because she's white. She said, but my children are biracial, and I want them to know everything about their heritage. Can you help me? That's what we need to do more of. We need to be willing to ask for help. We need to be willing to listen. And sometimes the listening may be painful. But if we don't start doing it more in our books, especially starting with our children's books, we're just going to hurt our nation. And we're going to hurt our children, who are the next generation, who will grow up with some of the same issues that we have now.
How can we begin to take steps beyond those who are writers? There may be some people listening that aren't writers, to be more inclusive, to reach out and heal their communities. Say they're living in an area where diversity is not embraced. What can individuals do to begin to heal their communities and grow together as people who are all important, who are all vital to the community?
Step out of their comfort zones. It may take effort. If you're in a community that there's not a lot of diversity, you're not in a city or a town that is lacking diversity. You're not in a nation that is lacking diversity. So what can you do? I always say Google will show you anything. Find out what's going on in your area. It's going to take work. It's not going to drop in your lap. And I think that's part of the issue, is that people are waiting for it to come to them instead of going to where they can find diversity. And will it be uncomfortable? I can almost say absolutely, especially if you've not been in a situation. And your first experience may not be where you land. But the question is, are you willing to step out? Are you willing to see what's out there? Like we just did have Martin Luther King's birthday. I know in newspapers, online, in so many forms of communication, there were activities taking place. Go to a parade. Go to an event at your local library. Just about every library across the country did something. Expose yourself to a different ethnic group. But it's going to take, it's a do, not a wait. And if we wait for it to happen, it's not.
So what can people look forward to as a benefit from stepping outside of their comfort zone?
Oh, their world will be expand in ways that they cannot even begin to imagine. What can they look forward to? Probably friendships with other ethnic groups, probably an understanding, a correction, their misunderstandings, growth, knowledge. The benefits far outweigh anything else if they're willing to step out.
I also want to ask you how you feel about the idea that the opposite of fear is actually love. And when we are able to overcome our fears and reach out to other people, we grow in love and our life centers of fulfillment will actually improve. Do you agree that that is part of the benefit of unity and diversity? And how have you seen that play out in your life?
I agree to the point that I see love, with it being the opposite, I see it as more being the action. Because some people are going to take it literally and go, but I don't know if I can ever love this situation or love this person. But can you act toward them and treat them like a person? Can you step into a situation and let go of some of your, I'm going to say, false beliefs? Are you willing to get out of that comfort zone? And how I see it in my own life is I feel like most of my life I have had to step out of comfort zones. I have been involved with organizations and different things that with people who are totally not like me. I love the fact that my parents raised me with the attitude of skin color does not represent the person. And so I've made friends with people of all nationalities because I was able to see past the skin color. Love, I think, is an action. And that's what it's going to take.
That is a very good point. And how does faith help us to overcome those issues of fear? If you have a faith in God, you mentioned that this was part of how you began to step out of your comfort zone because you felt called.
Mm-hmm.
How does that play a part in unity and diversity and taking those action steps that are so uncomfortable?
Faith plays a big role because the only way we can learn how to love is to experience God's love. And once we start experiencing His love on the level that He intended, then we can step out of a comfort zone. We can take chances because we know He's guiding our steps. We know that He can teach us how to, as it says, love the unlovable. You know, it's easy to love somebody who's your neighbor, who looks just like you, who has the 2 kids and the dog or the cat, but can you love the person who is sitting on a street corner, who is homeless? And what's that love look like? When we can see people with the eyes of Christ, then we see that they're lovable. And so faith plays a huge role if for no other reason, when you step into that uncomfortable situation, I can guarantee your prayer life will increase because you're out of your comfort zone.
It seems like we have to get out of our comfort zone in order to fulfill the best of who we can be. Would you say that's true? And have you seen that happen in your life?
I would say it's true. I've seen it happen over and over. Like I said, with this new role I took with being the managing editor, I would say, again, when we step out of our comfort zone, we are opening ourselves up to opportunities we never imagined. And so with my own life, I've seen it not only with my writing career, but with my life choices. When I went to college, I majored in education, and I told God all I wanted to do was be in a classroom and teach 20 or 30 kids a year, and after 20 or 30 years, retire, and I'd be a happy camper. And I felt like God said, okay, you could do that. Or I could put you in an environment where you're going to work with and train the teachers who'll go into those classrooms and touch more lives than you can ever imagine. So I went into full-time ministry because of that. And there's a lot of times when I feel like God has, I see the little picture, and he's like, but I've got a bigger one. You trust me to put the paint on the canvas. Mm-hmm. That's what we have to do, and that's what faith does. It allows us to trust God to put the paint on the canvas.
And it's important to remember that faith requires us to embrace those who aren't like us. That was part of what Christ did when he walked the earth. He embraced a diverse group of people all the time, people that were outside of his ethnicity. He went to Samaria. He went to the Gentiles. He went to people that the Jews he grew up with would never have even spoken to. He embraced people of the other gender he wasn't supposed to talk to in public. He did all kinds of things that were outside of the norm and outside of the comfort zone and outside of what was culturally acceptable. And if we're willing to do those things, we can step more into the likeness of Christ and more into fulfilling who we are. And I love that you're bringing that out and making that possible through what you're doing as editor of Harambee Press, through what you're sharing as a guidepost writer, and through your work with Word Weavers International. I love that you have so many roles that you've come into in your life as an individual. And as a friend of mine, I know that you are an extraordinary person and you shine with that faith and that love in your life. Can you speak to those who are ready to take that next step to overcome the strongholds of fear and insecurity and comfort zones and begin to take steps to include more diverse people in their lives? Can you give them some kind of encouragement from where you're standing?
As cliche as it sounds, my encouragement would be just do it. I can't tell you what step to take, but I can encourage you to take a step. Just do it. No matter how big, no matter how small. I was talking to my neighbor the other day, and we were commenting on just how diversified our cul-de-sac is. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian. And we all get along so well. We know each other because we've been here a long time. But if I had chosen never to set foot outside of my front door, never to knock on a neighbor's house for any reason, it wouldn't have happened. And we've all taken that initiative with one another. Whether it be, literally, can I borrow a cup of sugar? To, hey, I heard you're a teacher. Can you tutor my child in algebra? We stepped outside of our front doors. And so my encouragement would be to step outside of your front door and to pray. There's no way, if you're asking God to help you learn how to step into another culture, how to interact with someone who's not like you, that he's not going to answer that prayer.
That's really good. And I also feel like you're saying that we should just reach out and be willing to listen to other people and hear their hearts.
Yes. And that's it. That is totally it. To hear their hearts. And again, I will emphasize, we opened with this, but I would like to emphasize again, don't apologize if you're a part of the dominant culture. You have to embrace who you are before you can embrace anybody else. And that's important, because if you feel like you're walking around on eggshells, if you feel like you're tiptoeing about just because you're part of the dominant culture, then you're going to be miserable, and the likelihood of you going past your comfort zone is slim. Embrace who you are and ask God to show you others who are not like you, whom you embrace.
And if someone from either side of that encounters rejection or prejudice, how can we best respond to that response, which is coming from a place of woundedness, obviously? But how can we best respond to that without letting it hamper our outreach in the future?
That will come.
Mm-hmm.
I have no doubt. You will speak to someone who's wounded enough that when you're coming, trying to ask a question, they strike out. And all I can say is, don't let that stop you. Move forward. And as best as you can, shake it off, but don't stuff it. And I have read this recently, and I've also held it in my heart because a pastor said it so many years ago. And that is, wounded people wound people. Or another way, hurting people hurt people. Just realize that if they're striking at you, or if they're saying something that hurt you, they're speaking from a wounded heart. And as best as you can, don't take it personally and move on. Remember, it's steps. We always imagine that our lives are a straight arrow. And I don't know about anybody out there, but I know my life has been anything but a straight arrow. If you'd asked me when I was 18 what my life would be like, it would not look like what it is right now. It would not have involved cancer. It would not have involved having a daughter who goes through cancer. It would not have involved so many things. But I learned from it. And so when you are talking to people and they said something and it hurts, acknowledge it. But don't stop.
And if you have a faith in Christ, we can also remember those important things like you were mentioning, the doing instead of feeling, choosing to forgive them and turn that woundedness over to the hands of Christ for him to hold for you. Remember that he can take those wounds for you, and you can love from his heart even when your heart is broken.
Exactly. And it's interesting because a lot of times, or I will say there are times when your heart is broken, but yet you're still doing what you're supposed to be doing, or what God has called you to do, that he will multiply in ways you never imagine. But you have to be willing to do.
So it's important to acknowledge that the process of integrating ourselves with people who aren't like us is painful. It is uncomfortable, but it's more than worth it.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad that you came to talk to us about this today. Edwina, do you have any parting words that you want to leave with the listeners today?
Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. My parting words are that identify where your comfort zone ends and ask God to show you your next step.
Oh, that's really good. How can people stay connected with you, Edwina, so they can get their hands on the materials that you write, as well as availing themselves of the amazing resources that you're publishing through Harambee Press and Guidepost Magazines and all the other places where you are found as a speaker and as a writer and as a leader in our publishing and writing community?
Right now, because of the transition that I'm going through with Ironstein Media, the best way to reach out to me is through my email, which is harambepress@gmail.com. That's HARAMBEE press@gmail.com. I usually am fairly good with answering my emails. I'm going to leave it at that because of all the transition. I'd hate to give you a web page that will take you to nowhere. But if you want to talk more, if you want more information, just reach out to me. That is the best way to do it.
Well, thank you, Edwina. I am so glad that you came on to talk about this today. This is a topic that's dear to my heart, and I know it's dear to your heart as well. And I hope that all of you listening will connect with Edwina and avail yourselves of the resources that Harambe Press is publishing so that you can read them with your children, read them in your community with your church organizations and the places where you have influence, so you can more easily welcome diversity where you are. And come back next time for the upcoming episodes of Flourish-Meant.